The notebook had been sitting on that kitchen table for 22 years. Not the same notebook exactly, but the same idea, the same column of figures in Shane Jennings's handwriting. The same habit of writing down what a thing cost before he decided whether to fix it or let it go. Darla stood at the counter behind him, not looking at the numbers yet, pouring coffee into a mug that had belonged to her mother-in-law, and Pepper, the blue heeler with one brown ear and one white one, was curled against the leg of Shane's chair as if he had been assigned there. The number on the left side of that page was $152. That was the total Shane had spent on that dryer over 22 years, parts and all, counting the original 12 he paid for it at a yard sale in the summer of 2001. The number on the right side of the page, the one Roy had written down himself when he finally sat at that same table and added up what he remembered, was $6,400. That was what Roy figured he had spent on appliances he financed, replaced, and financed again across the same span of time. Darla looked at both numbers from the counter and said quietly, "Well." Shane looked at the page another moment, then closed the notebook. The dryer was running in the utility room. It had been running for 21 of those 22 years. It made a low, even tumbling sound, steady as a pump, and it was made from 2 dead machines that no one else had wanted. That is what this story is about, and it started earlier than the notebook and earlier than the $12. And you have to go back a little ways to understand why Shane Jennings was the kind of man who would spend a Tuesday evening in March pulling the heating element out of a stranger's discarded appliance on the curb, rather than driving to Kurt Bellis's store on the main strip and writing a check for something new. Shane grew up on a farm outside Calverton, a small county seat in the rolling country 30 miles east of the state line, the kind of place where the coffee shop has been the same coffee shop since before anyone can remember, and the elevator in the center of town still has the original grain company's name faded on the side. His father, Denny Jennings, farmed 560 acres and ran a small equipment repair shop out of a cinder block building behind the house. Denny fixed things because he had to in the beginning, because there was no money to replace them, and then he fixed things because it turned out he was good at it. And then he fixed things because he had decided long ago that the man who understood how something worked was always in a stronger position than the man who simply paid someone else to make it work again. Shane learned it the way farm kids learn most useful things, which is to say he learned it by standing beside his father while his father worked and asking questions that were answered with demonstrations rather than words. Denny would set a broken part on the bench and say, "Tell me what it's supposed to do." And Shane would explain it, best he could, and Denny would nod and say, "Then that's what you're looking for." He was not a sentimental man, Denny Jennings. He did not make speeches about self-reliance or the virtue of frugality. He just handed his son the right wrench and waited. By the time Shane was out of high school, he could rebuild a carburetor, rewire a starter motor, diagnose a fuel pump, and replace the bearings on a grain auger. He married Darla Kessler in 1998, 3 years after he came back from a 2-year stretch working construction in the city, which had told him everything he needed to know about where he did not want to spend his life. They bought a small place off County Road 14, 40 acres, a house that needed work, a barn that needed more. He took a job maintaining equipment at the elevator and worked on the house in the evenings and on weekends. He did not think of himself as thrifty. That was not the word he would have used. He thought of himself as someone who did not pay for something twice when once was sufficient. Let me tell you about the summer of 2001, because that is where the dryer story actually begins. Darla had mentioned that the dryer in the laundry room was getting loud. Not broken, not yet, but the drum bearing was starting to catch on the dry cycle, and it made a sound like a dog scratching at a door. Shane drove past a yard sale on a Saturday morning in June, saw a white dryer sitting at the end of a driveway with a price tag taped to the lid that said $15, stopped, looked it over, offered $12, and loaded it into the truck bed. He ran it for 4 months before the heating element burned out in October. The drum still spun. The motor was quiet. The wiring inside the cabinet was clean and dry. He set it against the shop wall. In February of 2002, the Halsteads, a couple who had retired from their farm on the south side of the county, put a dryer out by the road with a strip of tape across the door that said, "Free does not work." Shane stopped. He stood on the road shoulder and read the brand name on the front. Same brand as the one he had against the shop wall. Same approximate era, based on the trim style and the dial design. He loaded it into the truck. That evening, he pulled the control board and found a cracked timer relay. He pulled the heating element and found it intact. He checked the drum seals, checked the blower wheel, checked the drive belt. He spent 2 evenings on it. He swapped the working heating element from the Halstead machine into the body of the first dryer, whose drum assembly and motor were good. He replaced the worn belt on the first machine with the belt from the Halstead machine, which still had life in it. He tested the repaired unit in the shop with an extension cord before he moved it into the house. When he pushed the dial in and heard the motor come up clean and the heat start moving through the drum, he made a note in his composition notebook. Parts cost, $0. Labor, his own. That spring, Shane drove into Calverton for a bag of deck screws and stopped into Bella's Home Appliance on the main strip to ask about the belt size on a countertop mixer Darla's aunt had dropped off. Kurt Bellis was behind the counter, in his usual position, leaning on his elbows and talking to a grain rep who came in twice a year to visit. Kurt was 43 then, broad-shouldered, with a salesman's ease and a way of making you feel he had already decided what you needed before you got through the door. Shane asked about the mixer belt. Kurt looked at the part numbers Shane had written on a slip of paper, typed something into his computer, and said, "That machine is 15 years old. I can order the belt, but by the time it gets here, and you add labor, you're most of the way to a new mixer." He slid a catalog across the counter, already open to the right page. "I'll do you right on one of these." Shane looked at the catalog page. He said, "How much is the belt?" Kurt smiled the way people smile when they think a question is a little beside the point. $11.50, he said. "Plus shipping, figure $14. "I'll take it," Shane said. Kurt ordered the belt without comment. When Shane came back the following week to pick it up, Kurt handed him the small envelope and said, "You know, sooner or later it's going to be cheaper to just buy new. Nobody can keep patching forever." Shane paid $14 for the belt and drove home. Now his brother Roy lived 12 miles away on a rented place outside of Hardin, and Roy was about everything Shane was not in terms of how he thought about money and appliances. Roy was not irresponsible, not by the definition most people would use. He paid his bills on time mostly. He worked a steady job at the highway department. He bought his appliances the way most people do, which is to say he bought them when the old ones quit, and he financed them when he had to, and he did not spend much time thinking about the cumulative cost because each purchase seemed reasonable on its own. In 2001, when Shane was buying the $12 yard sale dryer, Roy was financing a washer-dryer pair from Bellis Home Appliance on an 18-month plan, the pair was $740. With the financing terms, Roy paid $812 by the time the plan cleared. Roy thought of it as $740. He did not write down $812. That is how the gap started. Not with any dramatic choice on either side, but with Roy's appliances being understood as what they cost at the moment of purchase, and Shane's appliances being understood as what they cost across their entire service life. Shane did not explain this to Roy because Roy did not ask, and Shane was not the kind of man who offered unsolicited arithmetic. The composite dryer ran through 2003 without incident. Shane replaced the drive belt again in 2004, using a spare he had kept from the Halstead machine. The belt cost him nothing. In 2005, the heating element began cycling inconsistently. He ordered a replacement element from a parts supplier he had found through a listing in a trade catalog, paid $22, had the dryer back in service on a Wednesday evening. He noted the date and the cost in the notebook. Running total for the dryer after 4 years was $34. Here is where I want to pause a moment and tell you what Roy was doing in the same stretch, because the parallel matters. Between 2001 and 2010, Roy replaced his original washer-dryer pair twice. The first replacement came in 2006 when the washer developed a pump problem that the repair estimate said would cost nearly what a new machine cost. Roy bought a new washer. He did not mention the repair estimate to Shane because he was not asking for advice. He put the new washer on a 12-month plan. In 2009, the dryer in that set began to give trouble on the heating circuit. Roy replaced it. He financed the new dryer over 18 months. He also replaced his dishwasher in 2007, his refrigerator in 2009, and his over-the-range microwave in 2010. Each of those decisions was defensible in isolation. Each repair estimate had been real. Each new machine had seemed like a reasonable choice. What Roy was not tracking was the total. Shane was tracking it for his own household, even if he was not applying it to Roy's. By the end of 2010, Shane's 9-year running cost on the composite dryer was $41. The dryer was running well. The drum seal he replaced in 2008, a $3 part sourced from the same trade supplier, had not needed attention since. He had also repaired rather than replaced the household washing machine when the lid switch failed in 2007, the kitchen dishwasher when the spray arm cracked in 2009, and the electric range when the surface element burned out in 2011. The range element cost him $14. The dishwasher spray arm was an $8 part. The washer lid switch had been salvaged from a junked machine a neighbor had set out 2 days before Roy's pump failed, which was the kind of timing that people call luck, and Shane called paying attention. The total Shane had spent on appliance repairs across his whole household, from the 2001 through the end of 2011, was approximately $290, counting parts for everything, not just the dryer. He was not counting his own labor, because he did not think of his labor as a cost when it was a Tuesday evening, and the alternative was watching television. In 2012, the county held its annual hardware swap at the fairgrounds, a day-long event where farmers and tradespeople traded parts, surplus materials, tools, and equipment they no longer needed. Shane went every year. It was a reliable source of spare motors, wiring, small hardware, belts, and the kind of parts that the supply catalogs listed, but took 3 weeks to deliver. He loaded a folding table and 2 boxes of surplus materials into the truck and drove over on a Saturday morning in October with Pepper in the passenger seat and a thermos of coffee on the floor. Kurt Bellis was there too, not selling parts, but walking the rows with two men who worked for him, picking up odd items and talking. He was in good spirits, the way he usually was, and when he saw Shane's table, he came over and looked at the spread of salvaged parts and motors Shane had laid out. He picked up a blower wheel Shane had pulled from a discarded dehumidifier and turned it in his hand. "You know what your problem is, Shane," Kurt said in the tone that was friendly on the surface and something else underneath. "You think everything is worth saving?" The two men with him chuckled. "You're out here trading in parts while my guys are delivering machines to half the county," Kurt went on, setting the blower wheel back on the table. "When's the last time you bought anything new? Your dryer alone must be older than your dog." Pepper at that moment was sitting beside the truck wheel watching Kurt with the specific calm interest that cattle dogs apply to everything they cannot immediately classify. Shane looked at Kurt for a moment. He said, "The dryer works." Kurt spread his hands. "It works until it doesn't. And then you're back out here with your parts, and a new machine is waiting at my store for what it actually costs." He moved on down the row, still talking to his two men, and the conversation drifted away. Shane sold 3 motors and a gear assembly that morning and drove home with $40 in his shirt pocket and a rebuilt water pump housing he had traded for on the second-to-last table, which fit a machine he had been waiting on for 8 months. If you had been at that hardware swap and had known both men, you would have noticed something in the balance of the scene that was easy to misread. Kurt looked prosperous that morning, which he was. His storefront on the main strip had been running for 11 years by then, and in 2012 the appliance market was still moving reasonably well at the retail level. He had 3 delivery trucks, 4 employees, a showroom with 40-some units on the floor. His visible position and Shane's were not close. What nobody standing at that fairground table knew, including Kurt, was that the structural forces that would undo Kurt's business were already in motion in 2012. Online appliance sales had been growing for years. The big box retailers had been expanding their appliance floor space and cutting margins. The customers who used to come to a local storefront for a washer or a range were beginning to price things at home on their computers and then either ordering online or walking into the big box with a printed page that showed what the same unit cost 12 miles away. Kurt could feel it in the traffic, but in 2012 he was still telling himself it was a temporary pattern. Shane did not know about any of that. He was not watching Kurt's business. He was watching the dryer's drive belt, which he replaced for the second time in 2013, another $3 part from the same supplier. By 2015, Shane's composite dryer was 12 years old. He had spent approximately $90 on it in total, counting the original 12. The machine was running without complaint. He had replaced the drum light once, the drive belt twice, the heating element once, and the blower motor once, that last repair in 2014, costing $38 and representing the single largest expense the machine had ever produced, a repair he had considered carefully before making. Running the numbers in the notebook the same way his father would have, asking what the blower motor was supposed to do, and then finding it where it was failing. Roy came by for supper that spring, as he did a few times a year, and the conversation at the table turned, the way it sometimes did, to what things cost. Roy had just financed a new refrigerator. His old one had developed a compressor problem, and the technician who came out had quoted him $410 for the repair. Roy had opted for a new refrigerator instead, a $780 model on a 24-month plan. He was telling Darla about the features on the new model, the way the ice maker was positioned differently, the adjustable shelving, and Darla was listening with the polite attention she gave everything Roy described. Shane was eating. I thought about having it repaired, Roy said. But for $400 on a 10-year-old machine, it just made more sense to go new. Shane looked up from his plate. What did the compressor, quote, include? He asked. Parts and labor, Roy said. What was the labor portion? Roy thought. He didn't break it out. Shane nodded and went back to his food, and nothing more was said about it. What he had not said, because Roy had not asked, was that a compressor replacement on a 10-year refrigerator was a 4-hour job, maybe 5, and that the compressor itself was probably $120 out of the $410. The labor portion was carrying the, quote, past the point where the new machine looked like the sensible choice. He did not say this because the refrigerator was already sitting in Roy's kitchen, and there was nothing useful in the observation now. But he wrote it in the notebook that evening, as a note to himself, not about Roy, but about the structure of the decision. Between 2015 and 2018, the pattern held on both sides without dramatic change. Shane repaired. Roy replaced. The composite dryer passed its 15th birthday in the utility room without ceremony, and with no part failures in that stretch, running the way a machine runs when its components have been selected twice, once at the factory, and once by a man who checked each one before he used it. Shane pulled the lint trap and cleaned the exhaust duct each fall, and made a note in the notebook each time that the dryer had cost him nothing that year. Roy financed a new range in 2016 and a new washing machine in 2018, the latter following a bearing failure that was quoted at $310 to repair on a machine he had owned for 7 years. Roy put the new washer on a 20-month plan. Meanwhile, on the main strip in Calverton, Kurt Bellis was having a harder year than usual. His third delivery truck had developed a transmission problem, and the question of whether to repair it or replace it was not a small one. He replaced the truck. He also let one of his 4 employees go quietly in the fall of 2017, saying that the workload had shifted, which was true. The showroom that had held 40-some units in 2012 held 32 in 2018. Online sales of major appliances had gone from a nuisance to a structural problem for small independent retailers over that 6-year stretch. The big box stores had also expanded their inventory and their delivery networks. A customer in Calverton County could now order a washer at 9 in the evening and have it delivered from a regional warehouse 3 days later at a price Kurt could not match without losing money on the transaction. He matched it anyway when he had to, trying to keep the customer, and each time he did his margin, thinned a little more. He did not talk about this publicly. He was a proud man and a hard worker, and he believed until late in the process that the business could be restructured in a way that made it viable at a smaller scale. He laid out a plan in 2018 to focus on installation and service calls rather than retail floor sales, which was a sound instinct, but the service revenue alone was not enough to carry the overhead on the storefront lease and the 2 remaining trucks. By 2019, he had reduced his floor inventory to 18 units and was running the business with himself and 1 part-time employee, a young man named Travis, who had been with him for 2 years and was competent and loyal and about to be handed a piece of very bad news. Shane did not know the details of any of this. He drove past the storefront on the main strip when he was in town and noticed the inventory thinning the way you notice a change in a tree you have walked past for years, not with concern exactly, but with the awareness that something is different. In the spring of 2019, the composite dryer developed a noise in the drum bearing. Shane diagnosed it in a single evening, noted the part number, ordered a replacement from the same trade supplier he had been using for 15 years. The bearing cost $6. He had the dryer running quietly again by Thursday. He wrote $6 in the notebook. His running total on that machine, from the $12 purchase in 2001 to the $6 bearing in 2019, was $137 over 18 years. Roy, that same spring, was looking at a quote for his refrigerator's ice maker, which had failed after 3 years and was quoted at $220 to repair under a service contract he had purchased when he bought the unit. The service contract covered parts but not the full labor charge, which added $60. He paid $80 out of pocket and considered himself fortunate. What he did not yet consider was the service contract premium he had been paying, $11 a month for 3 years, which represented another $396 spent on the machine since he bought it. Shane did not buy service contracts. He understood what they were, which is to say he understood that they priced the repair cost in advance at a margin that favored the seller. He wrote this down in the notebook once, in 2009, not as a judgment but as arithmetic. By 2021, the composite dryer was 18 years old. Shane had spent $140 on it over its full life, counting the original purchase. He had not replaced it because there was no reason to replace it. The drum still spun true. The heat came up within 90 seconds on the high setting. The timer worked. The machine did what a dryer was supposed to do, which was the question his father would have asked at the start, and the answer had not changed. In December of 2021, Kurt Bellis called his one remaining employee, Travis, into the store office and told him he was closing. He had made the decision in November after reviewing the third quarter numbers and understanding that the fourth quarter was not going to recover enough to change the conclusion. He was direct about it with Travis and apologetic in the way people are apologetic when a thing they built did not turn out the way they planned. Travis, who was 25, took it without visible distress, which made it harder. Kurt closed Bellis Home Appliance on the main strip in February of 2022, 21 years after he had opened it. The closing was not a catastrophe in the way foreclosures and bankruptcies are catastrophes. He paid his debts. He sold his remaining inventory to a regional dealer at a discount that hurt, but was manageable. He returned the space to the landlord with the walls in good repair. He was 63 years old, and he was tired, and he was not entirely sure what the next thing was going to be. His wife Carol said, the evening he cleaned out the desk, "You built something real. It just didn't outlast what changed." That was the most accurate thing anyone said about it. Roy heard about the closing at the coffee shop and mentioned it to Shane the next time he called. Shane said, "I saw the sign." Roy said he supposed it was hard for the small stores to compete anymore, and Shane said he supposed so. That was the extent of the conversation. What happened later that year, in the fall of 2022, was that Roy sat down at his own kitchen table and tried for the first time to add up what he had spent on appliances since 2001. He was doing this because his accountant, a careful woman named Evelyn, who had been advising him since 2014, had suggested he look at his household operating costs as part of a broader financial review. Roy found his old financing statements in a box he had not opened in years, pulled the ones he could find, and made a list. He came up with $6,400. That figure included the financing costs on the loans, the service contract premiums on 3 of the machines, and the purchase prices of the 11 major appliances he had bought in 22 years across 2 households. He looked at the number for a while and then called Shane and asked if he could come over that Saturday. Shane said sure. Roy drove over on a Saturday afternoon in late October with the legal pad in the passenger seat. He came in through the back door the way he always did, and sat down at the kitchen table and set the pad in front of him. Darla was in the next room and came to the doorway when she heard Roy's truck in the yard. Shane got the composition notebook from the shelf above the counter, sat down across from Roy, and opened it to the appliance pages. He did not make a speech about what he was showing Roy. He just turned the notebook so Roy could read the columns. Roy looked at the pages for a long time. He looked at the dryer column, which he could trace from the $12 entry in 2001 to the most recent entry, a $5 thermostat fuse in 2022, with every repair dated and itemized in between. He looked at Shane's household total, which was spread across 5 appliance categories and ran to $410 for the full 22 years, the dryer accounting for $140 of that. $410, Roy said. Across everything, Shane said. Roy looked at his own legal pad. $6,400, he said. Darla said from the doorway, "Well." Roy was quiet for a moment. He was not devastated. He was doing the arithmetic, which was a different thing. The slow recalculation of decisions that had each seemed reasonable, and now, laid in sequence, looked different. He said, "I didn't think about the financing cost on top." Shane said, "Nobody does until they add it." Roy looked at the dryer column again. "You've had that dryer since 2003. 2003 is when it was done," Shane said. "I bought the first one in 2001. The heating element in 2005, Roy said, reading aloud, $22. The blower motor in 2014, $38. The bearing last year, $6. He set the pad down. "I spent $6 on bearings and $800 on a dryer," Shane said. "You spent $812, you told me at the time." Roy made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He picked up his coffee cup and held it with both hands and looked out the kitchen window at the yard. It was late October, and the yard was brown and flat in the afternoon light, the maples along the fence line having shed most of their leaves. He sat with the number. "What I should have done," Roy said, and then he stopped. He did not finish it. Shane said, "You did what made sense to you at the time." That was true. It was also the kindest and most useful thing anyone was going to say about it. Let me tell you what Shane did the following spring, because that is where the shape of the story completes itself. Marcus Webb was 19 years old and lived 2 farms over on his family's property. He was a serious, quiet young man, the kind who asked questions that were specific rather than general, which Shane noticed and respected. Marcus had been working part-time at the elevator and doing odd jobs for 3 neighboring properties, and he had told Shane in passing one morning when they met at the mailbox that he was trying to figure out how to build his own shop, what equipment he would need, what tools, what knowledge, and how to keep a household running without spending everything he made on things that kept breaking. Shane said, "Come by Saturday morning if you want. I'll show you where to start." Marcus came over that Saturday, and the one after, and then the one after that, until it had become a regular arrangement without anyone formally declaring it one. Shane walked him through the diagnostic method his father had taught him, which started always with the same question. What is this machine supposed to do, and at what point is it failing to do it? He showed Marcus how to pull the back panel off a dryer without scratching the cabinet. He showed him how to read a wiring diagram. He showed him where the most common failure points were on a stack washer, on a dishwasher pump assembly, on a refrigerator ice maker line. He showed him the composition notebook, not all of it, but the appliance pages, the columns of dates and part numbers and costs. Marcus read through the dryer column without speaking, and then he looked up and said, $140 in 22 years. "152, counting this year," Shane said. "I replaced the thermostat housing in March." Marcus wrote the figure in his notepad. He said, "What would a new dryer cost?" "$700 to $900 for a basic model," Shane said. "More if you want features." Marcus wrote that down too. "My family spent more than that," Marcus said, thinking. "We replaced ours twice." "Most families do," Shane said. "It's not because they're careless. It's because no one ever showed them the question to ask." That was the closest Shane came to a philosophy speech across the entire conversation and across all the Saturdays. He did not say more than that. Marcus wrote it down anyway. Shane charged Marcus nothing for any of it. Marcus, for his part, showed up on time every Saturday and helped Shane with whatever else needed doing in the shop after the lesson was finished, which was not nothing. Darla made coffee and brought it out at mid-morning, which she did because she wanted to and because she recognized in Marcus the particular kind of young person who will make good use of what they are given. The composite dryer ran through 2023 and into 2024 without further expense. Shane noted this in the notebook. He had spent $152 on that machine over 23 years, counting the most recent repair. He had not replaced it because there was no reason to. It tumbled clothes dry in 40 minutes on the cotton setting, and the drum light came on when he opened the door, and the thermostat cycled the heat the way a thermostat was supposed to cycle the heat. Roy came by for supper in the late summer of 2024, and the conversation did not return to the ledger comparison from the previous fall. Roy had sold his old washing machine to a metal scrap dealer and repaired the newer one himself when the lid switch failed, following instructions he had found and then called Shane to verify. Shane had walked him through it in 10 minutes on the phone. The repair cost Roy $12 and an hour on a Saturday morning. Roy mentioned this at supper as if it were an ordinary fact, which was the right way to mention it. Kurt Bellis had taken a job consulting for a regional appliance distributor, work that suited his product knowledge and his gift for conversation, and he appeared now and then in Calverton for lunch at the coffee shop with old customers. He was not a man who collapsed under reversal. He had built something real, as his wife Carol said, and it had run up against something structural and impersonal that had dismantled comparable businesses all across the country in the same decade. He had not made the wrong choices so much as he had been operating in a market that moved faster than his model could adapt. The scale of the thing had never been personal, which was the honest account, even if the wound was. Shane drove past the empty storefront once or twice a year. The "For Lease" sign had come down, and a different business had moved into the space, a small insurance office, and the sign above the door was nothing Shane had any particular feeling about. He thought about his father occasionally when he worked in the shop. Denny had been gone since 2016, a December day that had come and gone the way those days do, not gently. Shane had kept the cinder block shop building on the old place and drove out twice a year to make sure the roof was holding. He had taken 2 items from the building when he cleared it out: a parts manual for a combine header and a composition notebook. The first one Denny had used. 1979, pencil entries in his father's hand, oil filter cross-references and belt sizes and notes on what a machine was supposed to do and at what point it was failing to do it. That notebook was on the shelf above Shane's workbench, between the current notebook and the parts catalog with Marcus Webb's fingerprints now on the cover. On a Thursday evening in October of 2024, Shane ran a load of laundry after supper. He loaded the drum, set the dial, pushed it in, and listened to the motor come up. The dryer was running the same way it had been running for 21 years, the same even tumbling sound, steady as a pump, in no particular hurry. He turned the utility room light off and left it to its work. Darla was at the kitchen table with a library book she had been working through for 2 weeks, and Pepper had moved from the living room floor to the space between Shane's chair and the wall, which was where Pepper spent most evenings when Shane was home. Shane sat down and poured a last cup of coffee from the pot that had been sitting since 7, and was not as good as it had been at 7, and he opened the composition notebook to the dryer page, not to add anything, because he had nothing to add. He just read the column the way you read a thing you know the ending to, but still want to see an order. $152. 23 years. A machine made from 2 dead machines that no one wanted, diagnosed the way his father had taught him to diagnose anything, by asking what it was supposed to do and finding the point where it had stopped. He closed the notebook and set it on the table. Darla did not look up from her book. Pepper breathed slow and steady on the floor. From the utility room, the dryer kept running,